please let's give Patrick a big round of applause and welcome to Atlas School.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Patrick. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing me to come and, travel all this way through the power of the internet to hang out at Atlas School. It is quite cool to just get to randomly speak to a bunch of you from the entire other side of the planet. It is a lot of fun. I like chatting about augmented reality stuff in general, so this is always fun for me. I'm going to be chatting today about building GeoGlitched, which is an AR game that I put together. There's a whole lot that I'm going to chat about. It's a lot of slides, but they're all hopefully going to be useful to everyone. And feel free to be thinking of questions throughout as well. So I'm going to be also talking about Lightship ARDK, which I think a bunch of you have heard of already from what I've heard from Zach. But I was going to give you guys a quick overview of that as well. Even just a refresher can be good. Sometimes I may explain it in a slightly different way, might spark some ideas, that sort of thing. So I was going to give a bit of a run through of that, tell you what GeoGlitched actually was, go through all the lessons that I learned, hopefully to share them with you guys so that you all don't have to go through the same issues that I went through. You can kind of jump a few hoops. All the challenges that I went through, App Store gotchas as well. So things when it comes to submitting to app stores and stuff that I found while trying to put together alphas and betas and all that sort of thing. And why you should enter hackathons and competitions, which all is relevant, I promise you. So first, who is this random person that is just appearing on a screen in Atlas Studio? I am Patrick Catanzariti, otherwise known as PatCat for short, because Catanzariti is too long for most people, so it just gets abbreviated. I'm the head of engineering at Nova Entertainment. For those who are not in Australia, that would mean nothing. But Nova is one of our radio stations here in Australia. And so I'm head of engineering there, which is luckily I don't have to manage the radio waves or anything like that. But I manage our apps, websites, smart devices, all the ways that people can listen to the radio on our internet-based, digital-based platforms. I'm managing all of that. And one day, I hope to be managing an augmented reality way of doing that too. We'll see how that goes. I'm also one half of the Reality Crafters. That's a duo that I have with my wife, Mary. We've been working on a bunch of different AR prototypes and all sorts of little things, but GeoGlitched is also a part of it. And we're also doing a lot of exploring around the balance between technology and people's lives. So how we can look to the future and make people's lives better with technology, help people enable more in their lives with technology, and also not get too overwhelmed with technology ruining their life, I guess, because it can go both ways. You can have technology do amazing things, but it can also go in the complete opposite direction and be harmful. So we want to empower people with technology and a lot of advice around all of that too. So it's a random and very fascinating duo that we're building at the moment. I'm also the founder of Sid AR, which is an AR meetup that started this year, or maybe slightly last year. I have to check. I think slightly by the end of last year, here in Sydney. I am in Sydney, Australia. I should mention that as well. And so we've got our AR meetup that's been doing all right so far. I'm trying to find all the different people around Sydney who are interested in augmented reality. We do have agencies that work in VR and AR stuff here. And we've also got a lot of individuals who are really keen on it, a lot of students, similar to all of you who are really keen on it, who are all learning VR and AR stuff. So we've got a little fun community that gets together every month or two, plays around with headsets and technology and shows different things that we've got to show and shares ideas similar to what we're doing today. I'm also a Niantic Lightship leader, which sounds fancy. I don't work for Niantic, so I'm completely able to say all the things that I actually want to say. But it's sort of a role for the community. So I'm helping run a lot of the community-based stuff. So managing the Discord, sort of being a point of contact. And if anybody freaks out and needs help with stuff, helping them get in touch with Niantic, and helping Niantic know how the community is doing, what we could improve for people trying to use the Lightship ARDK. That's my email. I can also get Zach to share around contact details later, but I do want to reiterate over and over again, ask me questions. Doesn't have to be now. if you want further information later, if there's something that I mentioned and you forget what it was, or you want clarification, or you've just got a random question about building an augmented reality application, anything that comes to mind, any advice you need, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to help where I can, or try and direct you in the right direction if it's something that I don't know, but I could find somebody who does. I'm also on Twitter, but people don't use it much anymore, but it's there in case. I'm on all the other social medias as well, so you can always find me on LinkedIn and stuff as well, which I actually tend to find there's a lot more augmented reality chat and stuff on LinkedIn. I spend a lot more time there than I do on Twitter these days. And that's me from a really long time ago, wearing a augmented reality headset. That was the Meta 1 headset. For those who don't know, there was another company called Meta, before the current company called Meta, that was making augmented reality headsets. And so I've been building random prototypes. I think this was at least 10 years ago now. This was me showcasing a little Meta Kitty app where it was like a little cat that you could feed. You fed it burgers, and then you could drag it to a bed to sleep. It was a very basic one. I was wanting to do a lot more stuff with augmented reality than the headset was really capable of at that time. But it's been fun times for quite a while now. So the Niantic Lightship ARDK. This is relevant because my app is built in Niantic Lightship ARDK, and it's also the main way that I know how to make AR stuff. So I thought I'd run through what it can do in case it helps you all before we get into GeoGlitched. So it's got depth estimation, which you can also get from a lot of other frameworks. And if you're building for headsets, like the Oculus Quest, I believe Oculus Quest has its own depth estimation. All of the Lightship ARDK stuff is for iOS and Android, so it's all mobile phone based. Relies very much on ARKit and ARCore on those devices, but it builds on top of them. So their depth estimation is really handy. It's cool just to have stuff that just comes out of the box, where you don't have to go out and build all this stuff yourself, because I'm not good enough to build my own depth estimation. I don't have the time for that. So being able to just kind of get it out of the box working, and you build a game on top of it is much easier. Real world occlusion. This one is starting to come out a lot more on other frameworks as well for AR. But at the time, this was a really big deal, where it is basically the idea that if there's a real world object and a digital object, that the digital object could know whether it's behind the real world object. And so it would make it look a lot more like it's actually in the real world that you're in. In this case, there's a cube that is behind that lovely Pokemon plush, and the framework can tell that it's supposed to be behind it. And so these sorts of things add to a lot more interesting gameplay, having things run out from behind a couch or jump out from it behind a table. All those sorts of things are a lot more interesting than what used to be AR, which was always just everything always at the front of your view, which isn't quite as realistic. So it makes it all look like it's actually there. Real-time meshing is the one which my app uses quite heavily. This is an example from Niantic of their long-distance meshing, where they're able to kind of put up streamers around a city by being able to tell generally what shapes are around. So it sort of places it's like a giant sheet is the best analogy I've ever heard for it, around your world, where it can't tell the absolute fine details of what's there, but often enough to know where main surfaces and things are. So you can place things onto those surfaces, have things like balls bounce off them for physics, characters run on top of them, that sort of stuff. And the long distance stuff is really handy because it means that it can sort of estimate it from a much further away distance, which can be useful for things like this, where you're not really right up and close and personal with, say, the further away cars and buildings, but you can still use the general estimations for your AR applications. Semantic segmentation is actually really, really helpful for a number of different applications, and also kind of cool. It sort of freaks people out at times that the phone can do this when you include it in the game. What it means is Niantic have a few different categories of regions within that camera view that it can work out through machine learning. So it can work out what parts of this image are a sky, or what part of it is trees, or what part of it is ground, and it's getting better. So there are other things like what part of it are people, or what part of it is a cat. Things like that, where the goal is basically, if you've had any experience with Unity, all this is within Unity, then it's basically like you can add a mask that will only display stuff on that layer. So you could say only display my game in the sky. And then you could make an entire AR game that is just people look at the sky and say they play Space Invaders or something like that. You don't have to work out how do you work out where the sky starts and ends. All you do is tell the ARDK, only let this show up in a sky. And the rest of it, you can just do with Unity and how you would build a normal game. So that stuff is very fun. I've done a lot of trying to use semantic segmentation to change the way that the world looks a bit. So in previous things that myself and Mary in the Reality Crafters have done, we built things where we tried to make the weather look different. So change the sky to look more gray and rainy and cloudy if you're in certain parts of a game, and then change it to look more sunny and bright in other times. Didn't work 100% when we were doing it early days. There'd be ways to really make it better now, but there's a lot of potential there. And you can, because it's just using because it's just all through Unity, you can have things animated, you can have entire games, you could have video playing in the sky, whatever you wanted, basically. So they've got just an animated 3D model there. It has object detection as well. You can get object detection from other services. So one of the other services that I've used in the past, I'm going to blank on, but I'll get back to it later. There are a few which can do machine learning object recognition now within Unity. So I'll follow up on that one because I've blanked out, but it's early here. But basically, object detection in Lightship is really, really straightforward because you can detect what objects are. You can sort of detect multiple at once as well. So you could do things like detect how many people are visible at any one point, or how many cats are visible at any one point, or things like that, and use those to affect how your game plays out. A lot of these you can combine as well, so it's not one or the other. You can do all these things in one game and make some really curious creations within this, and use it basically as magic. You don't have to make it really obvious that it's counting how many cats are in the scene, for example. The game could just subtly change depending on what's there in the scene. You could subtly change it, tweak it if there are too many people in the scene. You could do all sorts of stuff like that, where it's just using these things off in the background. It also has maps. So Niantic made Pokemon Go. That's the main thing that they're known for. And a few other things, Ingress and games like that. But all of their games have this map. And so luckily, they've also released the map functionality. So if you wanted to make a more widespread game where people walk around the world and you want an accompanying map that can help guide them to go to landmarks, to pick up points, stuff like that, really similar to Pokemon Go, you can do that with their maps, part of the ARDK as well. Shared AR is another big one. If you want to have multiplayer games and you don't want to build it all yourself, their shared AR functionality means that you can have multiple people play the same experience, and it can manage their position in the world in relation to the other phones and share the objects in there. So if somebody generates, as an example here, they're generating mushrooms. In demos that I've built, we've generated, say, balls of light and things that people could kind of shoot at each other, or generate things that will affect the world around them. Like if they collect points, their points are shared across the game. That could affect how the augmented world looks to them. So there's a lot there. It just covers a lot of that shared functionality within AR. VPS is the virtual positioning system. That is something where if you want to create an experience which has really specific in terms of things being done in one specific spot in the world, then you can use this. This is a demo that we built for a different competition for Niantic. I'll try and show it really briefly again there. Basically, the idea was we had, there was a town here called Camden in Sydney, and it had a lot of floods happening. I think it had like 3 or 4 floods in one year. And so we were trying to build a concept app for Camden where we could encourage people to come back to Camden, to have a reason for people to come visit. And what we came up with was this VPS-enabled app where you could go to different landmarks within Camden, and you would collect crystals, and you would end up playing a game where if you had one of each type of crystal at a landmark, you could unlock it and free it from being sort of shrouded in this material. So this is sort of what it looks like at the moment, and you had to put the crystals in the right order for it to work. And if you did, then the landmark would reappear. And so we also have semantic segmentation here, though it's a bit messy in this demo because it was very overcast. But the way that all this worked was literally with VPS, you can say in this specific location, so as is an example here, this is Camden Pools, in this location, have this experience. And you can do this a lot easier now than when I was doing it back with this, where before then, you had to actually go to these locations, which is wonderfully challenging when you're building an app for a town that keeps being flooded, because it was flooded while we were building the app as well. And so we had to re-scan different locations that suddenly were no longer available because they were literally damaged by floods. But VPS is really handy for that sort of stuff. If you want to build something, say, for your town, say it's a history walk, and you want to point out where different aspects of your history for your town have been, you could literally say, okay, go to these steps, go to this statue. If people are there looking at this statue, make this object appear right behind the statue in this specific spot, which is very, very useful. The harder thing for it is if you want to make this a worldwide game, then there's a little bit more involved, but you can now use, they've got a browser that you can use to browse different locations that have been scanned around the world. So you could still theoretically build something that could put stuff in, say, a specific spot in Sydney, and then a specific spot in Oklahoma, and a specific spot over in, say, Indonesia. And you just find areas that other people have scanned, and you can make use of those. With all Lightship, it also all works with Unity's AR Foundation. So if any of you have used AR Foundation before with Unity, that's Unity's default way of doing AR. Lightship updated to basically use AR Foundation as the base and then build on top of it. That's also useful if you want to expand your game later on to be on headsets and other devices. AR Foundation works with other headsets, so it can be used to work with, say, the Oculus Quest, with the Apple Vision Pro. It can be used for a whole bunch of other devices. So you can sort of build a level of your game to work with AR Foundation, then leverage some of the stuff for ARDK that would work on, say, phones. But then you could also add other functionality, like if you wanted to work with Apple Vision Pro or the Quest, you could add those separately, all building on top of AR Foundation. So it makes life a lot easier at the moment. So that's the ARDK, and it all comes in handy because I wanted to then show how then using ARDK in the real world to make an app would work, and how all this came about. So GeoGlitched is the game that I started. That's my first thing that I built with the ARDK several years ago. It's a game which generates objects from about 41,000 potential locations around the world. By locations, I just have a list of 41,000 different cities around the world. And what it does is it tries to generate objects based on those cities. So you can see there's street signs, banners, all sorts of stuff that will appear in the world. And the goal is to place these in augmented reality around the player as they're playing this game. It's basically the idea. If anybody's played GeoGuessr before, or Common San Diego, those sorts of games, it's sort of a combination of a lot of those, where the goal is you have all these objects appearing around you. You can have a time limit, or you can play without a time limit, but you're supposed to work out where are these objects coming from? What town is it? So there'd be, say, this previous one, say there's a Nissan location, so it must be a Nissan dealer of some variety. What towns, what cities, what countries would have Nissan? A parking lot called Core Arbitorium. no idea what that is, or a festival with that name. So you'd go through and try and work out from multiple choice, what of those options would this town be? The idea is basically to try and get people to be moving around a lot more. Rather than playing games where you're just sitting in one spot on your computer, this is encouraging people to get up, go outside, move around your house. More objects will appear the more you walk around. So if you are trying to work out what something is and you need more clues, the only way to really get more clues is to move and go around and do stuff, which is one of the benefits of augmented reality. And something that I would recommend everybody take advantage of is when you're building stuff for AR, encourage people to get up, encourage people to move, encourage people, even just subtly, without realizing it, to have to do things that involve more than just stand in one spot, because that's where the benefit of AR is. It's also the benefit of making something look more immersive. If somebody feels like they can just walk anywhere and the game's just going to work and adapt and do stuff, that makes it really feel like stuff's actually going on around them, and makes for a better experience. So this is a video of some of the early stage gameplay. Basically, it will load a whole bunch of landmarks and stuff at the start, and then you basically get to choose either an indoor mode or an outdoor mode. This mainly just affects how big landmarks are, because I discovered things that they're really big outside is fine, but inside in a house, a giant sign like this one is too big for most houses. My house is tiny, so it looked ridiculous. So I wanted to give people the option. But basically, you walk around and different objects. This is different, say, news stories for this location. So this shows that this location, this town, they cared about Anthony Davis not being able to play in an upcoming NBA game. That can sometimes be a clue that throws people off, because a lot of places around the world like NBA, but in this case, it was a place in America. So then you play over and over and over again to your heart's content, exploring the world and having many different rounds of trying to work out what location has been placed next. And there's all different sorts of items. There's train line items that are just more indicating there's a railway there. There's flags. There's all sorts of stuff that I'll show you with pictures later on. But the overall idea is that this is all working with the Lightship ARDK. So this is all working off their meshing to know where the floor is, where we can place objects in this world that will make sense. And it's gotten a bit better. This video is, I think, at least 2-3 years old by this point. So this is an older version of the ARDK as well. It has improved a lot. But that's sort of what the game looks like back then. And it has evolved. Where this all came about, though, and the reason I started with ARDK in the first place, was that Lightship had a challenge where they wanted to encourage people to try Lightship. They set up to build a hackathon where they gave developers a few months to go out and build an app that used the Lightship ARDK. They called it the Lightship AR Demo Challenge, and I basically took that as an opportunity to make something. I personally had wanted to make stuff for a while, but working full-time, having lots of other side projects, I just never got around to making something with Lightship. I'd done a lot of web AR stuff and also small demos, but I never really built like a proper full-out game that would be something people could play. So I built it for this challenge, and then in some wonderful turn of events that I'm very grateful for, I won. GeoGlitched came first, which also came with other benefits, such as getting to meet the people at Niantic, chat with them, and get a lot of feedback on how my app could be improved, and all sorts of other wonderful stuff, which I'll explain later on in why you should join hackathons and these sorts of competitions. So, how does this game work? I just showed you a random bunch of stuff. I mentioned meshing, but for those who are more technically curious, I want to kind of cover a little bit about exactly what's going on behind the scenes. So the ARDK meshing is basically what's being used for generating items. It's similar to what you see here. This is just visualizing the mesh from Niantic. So that grid there is where the mesh is. The mesh can, as you can see, also see where buildings are and walls and stuff like that. It can also work out ceilings and stuff like that. Like it will see generally flat surfaces around the place. My game has more limitations on where it'll place things. So it'll only place things on the ground. It's not going to place things too high up from your view because we want people to be able to see what's getting placed. And you also don't want to generate it into the ceiling or in walls and stuff like that too much. So where possible, I try to generate things on the ground, just around the place. This doesn't mean that everything's just going to be ground. It could be on top of a car, as you saw, on top of things like bushes. Stuff like that is where AR still is at the moment in terms of knowing what the world is. It still sees it generally as just flat plains or like a sheet that's placed across the world. But most of the game is benefiting from that meshing and doing that well. Otherwise, the rest of it is using a whole lot of open APIs. So all of the game is generated in a way where it will always be different every time you play it. And it's being generated differently using real world data, which I want it to be really similar to things like things like GeoGuessr, where the data will always come from going through Google Street View. So it can always be different. It can always be updated automatically without the game creators needing to do too much. I wanted my game to always be different. So nothing's hard-coded when it comes to, say, landmarks and things like that. I've used something called OpenStreetMap to find all the landmarks for each location. So I've got just a hard-coded list of cities, but then after that point, what landmarks it finds is entirely out of my control. It just will go out, find landmarks that this OpenStreetMap sees in that city. So if a new building gets built in Oklahoma, I don't have to worry about that. My game will put it in there. It'll see it and add it in. Similarly, if something goes away, if there's a landmark that doesn't exist anymore, my game's not going to show it anymore after that point. But it also means there's so much more that can be generated in this game than I could do myself. There's no way that I could put in the amount of landmarks that get generated myself hard coding. I would be here forever. So I take those landmarks from OpenStreetMap and I interpret them. So I can interpret, say, if there's a dock or a port, I've put in this Mount Vernon ferry landing, has the little floaty thing that I forget the name of, what they call that. I'm not near water where I am in Sydney. I'm further inland. So these are a mystery to me. But the goal is showing that this is more near water, right? There's a port there. There was something called Mount Vernon ferry landing. So instead of putting it on a sign, I've put it on this floaty device thing. Similarly, this sign here is more, I think, saying that it's more of a natural landmark. So it's more wooden. It could be more of like a forest or something like that. So I try and just interpret what the landmarks are to give people a little bit more of a clue of what it is, and also to try and make the game more interesting, slightly more different than just always having signs all the time. The one thing that I have got hard coded in is flags and currencies. And there's reasons for this, which I discovered you're not actually legally allowed to put copies of currencies for many of the world's currencies in a game, I think, without getting express permission, because it can be seen as you're like copying their currency and counterfeiting and things like that. So I have only a specific set of currencies that I'm legally allowed to include, but this allows me to have, say, if I know that they're in a specific country, I think Russia is one of them, where you can use their currency images for things. Then while you're walking around, there may be a bill on the floor of money, so that could be another clue as to what country you're in. Flags, also, I've got hard-coded in just because, for now at least, I'm hoping people aren't going to change their flags too regularly for countries, so it's like that won't require internet connection. And that also gives a lot more clues as to what place people are in. All the news headlines are coming from something called the Media Stack API, so that I can just give it a location and say what news is happening in this location at one point. They all look like that these days. I've also tried out using GPT-4 to generate events. So this is generating, these banners are generating what events could be in a location at a specific time. And it's generating them in different views. So the posters on the wall. They're specifically timed events where we can kind of say what date they'd be on. They'd be more like, say, a sporting game or a theater play or a music performance, things like that it can find. And the banners are more, say, cultural events that would be more likely to appear on banners across the city. And this is me trying to get a little bit more from areas where there isn't really an API for it yet. There's no API that tells you what events are going on in a city at any one given time or what performances are happening. So I'm trying to bridge the gap. I've also been trying out using it to generate things like receipts and restaurant menus, which AI can do all right at, where you can say, hey, in this location, what would a typical restaurant menu look like? Or what would a supermarket receipt look like? So then as you're walking around in augmented reality, you could see a receipt left on the floor and kind of get hints as to where it could be. So that's what GeoGlitched was, still is at the moment. It's still developing, there's still more to do, but lessons learned, there are a bunch. The first thing that I found is you'll end up having a lot more iterations of a game before it's ready for release than you think. I initially thought, after initially making the first version, I would just release it, things would be fine. I could just release it out to the wild and iterate from there. But what I found is actually, especially from advice, not to do that straight away. And it has actually been very helpful. So rather than iterating it out in the open, I've been doing more iterations closed. So having just a closed beta and letting only a few people who I know are using the app at the moment try it out, give me feedback. It's been expanding slowly over time, but this also means that you can test things really safely, especially if you're using stuff like APIs. If you're going to have, say, a million people suddenly randomly download your app and start triggering a whole bunch of API calls and stuff like that, if you've got an issue in your app, that's a problem because you'll end up having to pay for a lot of those API calls. So having smaller sample sizes first, get people to try it, then you can sort of find those bugs and those issues before it's blown out to proportions that will make it very difficult for you to control. So alpha testing, though, was actually important. So while I say don't just release, also don't wait too long to get people trying your app. Even if you think that it's not ready yet, if it's really simple, get a few people to try it. Get, say, your friends and family to try it. Get other students to try it because you learn a lot from getting some people to try your app. When I got people to try out GeoGlitched initially, I found entirely new things that I didn't even think of that I had to adjust for the app. Ways that it loaded. People were getting really frustrated with how long it took in between levels. Like, so once you've chosen a location and you're waiting for the next one, people were like, I would really like it to just go to the next location now, whereas it would wait because you'd be loading the next location data, going through all the APIs, things like that. So I had to try and find ways to optimize it because it was just ruining the experience a bit for people. Lightship AODK was helpful, though, in that within that competition, I did manage to make the majority of GeoGlitched first version working within a month. And that was a lot to do in a month. But if I didn't have that framework to lean on, it would have been much, much more difficult to do what I did. So I would recommend, it doesn't have to be Lightship ARDK, but if you're building something, lean on frameworks, lean on what already exists, and sort of build upon that rather than trying to do it all yourself. And that was where I was going with that one. There are also frameworks that don't have to be the entirety of your game. Like, so Lightship ARDK is the foundation of my game, basically. If Lightship ARDK is not there, then the meshing is gone. But theoretically, I could take that meshing that I've got in Lightship, take it out, and put a different meshing solution into it, and the game can still work. So try and build it in a way where you're leaning on frameworks, but you're able to sort of take things in and out if you wanted to over time, because frameworks don't always necessarily continue to exist forever, and better frameworks can come out, and you want to be able to kind of adapt. There's also tricks to performance with AR, and this can be an entire topic in itself, but a few things that I wanted to just suggest to you all, because it'll come in handy no matter what AR app you're building, is try and keep the amount of stuff that's going on in the background to a minimum. So what I found initially was when I tried to optimize it to, say, load locations faster between rounds, I started trying to do stuff like, can I load the next location while they're playing the current location? And while it's possible, you can, like I could be loading the next location while they're playing and trying to work out where they are right now. That ruined performance like crazy. And iOS is a little bit better than Android, so always test on both. But the performance is really, really key with augmented reality. You don't know how good somebody's phone is going to be or their headset if they've got, say, a Quest 3 compared to a Quest 2. So doing the least possible is the best way with AR at the moment. You can't rely on, say, a device being a high-end device, still managing to do a lot all together at once. But trying stuff is the only way to really tell what's going to work. I wasn't able to tell quite how much of a performance impact it would have until I got to it and started experimenting and trying stuff. So always iterate, try stuff. And every time you've added something to your app, try it again on a physical device, because it could also look fine in Unity when you hit the play button in play mode and you're looking at it through a simulator. But when it comes to the actual devices, that's where you'll see how hot does it make it? Is it starting to overheat? Is it really kind of draining the battery? Is it really kind of pushing the limits too much? And when you find those things, then you've just got to sort of see what were you doing at the time and pare it down a little bit. Find clever ways of doing it. I've sort of set it now so that, say, within GeoGlitched, when you're loading environments, it's doing it in a separate scene entirely to a different scene which does all the AR stuff. So the camera isn't being used. There's no augmented reality happening anytime that a location is being loaded. And then I know that the moment that locations are loaded and queued, that it goes into the augmented reality view where nothing is ever going to load. There's no internet connectivity issues, nothing like that. It's already stored, it's cached, and it just focuses on the AR part. And that helped a lot. Challenges. Loading times can be hard, so always keep that in mind. If you are going to build something which has an open API, this also relates to using the wonderful AI frameworks these days. If you're using, say, GPT-4 and things like that, loading times can be a problem. So don't expect that your app is always going to load them really quickly. Not everybody has the best internet. I don't know how good the internet is over where you are, but in Sydney, especially where I am, more outskirts of Sydney, internet can be really terrible and patchy, especially with 4G networks and things like that. So keep that in mind, that the APIs may be a bit slow. Try to cache things where you can, and try and always have an offline mode. So at least for me, some of the things will still appear, flags will still appear, basic stuff will appear, even if it doesn't manage to get every single API. If, say, the landmarks work and the news stuff works, but say GPT dies for whatever reason, my game can still work. So always try and find ways around. If there's a loading time issue, if something times out and doesn't work, try and make sure that the game will still work as much as you can. And downtime is the thing. The APIs that you think will never go down, I think almost every API I've used by this point has gone down at some point. So keep that in mind as well. Wall detection. So if anybody's about to do wall detection in their app, or if you've already tried, this can be challenging, and it's really strange the way wall detection works, especially at least in what I think is AR Foundation and the ARDK, is at the moment, in those frameworks at least, can't work out a flat wall and know that, say, this is one specific wall. It sees it as many separate walls still, like it'll put like many different planes on top of each other that it sort of estimates is the wall location. But then if you're trying to place something on that wall, it gets more challenging. So when I was generating, say, posters on those walls, if I let it generate posters on every wall it saw, there was a lot of overlapping posters and posters on top of posters and things that weren't even walls that it would just see as like, if there's like a little kind of crease in between, it could generate a totally separate wall there. So that's a really hard one that it's hard to fix yet. I've sort of limited it by reducing how many items it can generate on a wall to kind of hide the fact that wall detection is not perfect. But that's something to keep in mind. If you're doing things like physics, having balls bouncing off walls or anything like that, that's fine, because it generally knows where surfaces are, and that works. But if you're trying to place stuff on a wall, that's where it can get a little bit more messy. If you're only placing one thing on a wall, that's fine. If, say, you were placing a portal that somebody looks at, they click on a wall, it generates something, that's also okay. It's just, in AR at the moment, one wall is many walls. It was also hard for me when Lightship ARDK 3 came out and AR Foundation. So I initially built this app on Lightship ARDK 1, and it changed multiple times throughout the time this app has been built. So I've upgraded it twice. That can be a challenge in itself. So always keep in mind, frameworks are going to change. You're going to have to adapt and update your app because the new features won't come. Excuse me, the new features won't come to you otherwise. And database costs was a big one for me. I was trying to store a lot of the location items in the background, so I wouldn't have to call those APIs every time. But it got very expensive for me to be storing a lot of this stuff to cache it. So that would also be very helpful for anybody if you were thinking about a closed beta. Thank goodness I was doing a closed beta, because then only a few people were trying my app and doing it at the time, because I was trying to just on demand, every time a location was found and landmarks were seen, store those in a database so the next person doesn't have to kind of go through and use those APIs. If I had many people using my app, if it got to the thousands, I would have had really, really big database costs. And the other thing I tried to do was sun simulation. I sort of got there in the end, but I ended up getting rid of it from the app for now, where I was trying to simulate where the sun would be based on that location. So where in the sky would it be at this time of day? I decided that's probably not worth it for the effort, but that was something that I could do with the semantic segmentation. So you could place a sun in the sky, and it looked kind of cool, but it was also very hard, and performance-wise, it was a bit of a challenge. GPT-4 also, I know that everyone's excited by AI and GPT, but it's also a little rubbish. And so keep that in mind if you're going to rely on it for anything, because a lot of these things were coming up very wrong. So I don't know if you can see it from there, but that Cirque du Soleil poster, the date that it gave was 1.5/5 in 2023. That's not a date. That doesn't work. It's completely incorrect. And there's no way to really check it so easily, because I'm generating stuff like on the fly. So it's not the most reliable necessarily for these things. So I'm still working out the best way to kind of go forward with that one. International text is also really hard. So if you are making an app that's going to be more international, if it's going to have multiple languages in the one app, Unity struggles with that a little bit. You can have multiple fonts for each language, and you can have fallback fonts. So you could say have an English font as the main one, and then a fallback for, say, if it's going to have, say, Japanese characters or Cyrillic. But even with that, if it gets too much, so the way that Unity handles fonts is it generates a glyph, basically. Well, this is one of the ways. It can generate a glyph of all the characters it thinks you're going to use, but there's a limit to how much it can generate and store. So I was getting to the point where I was hitting limits, where it had already stored all the different language fonts it thought I was going to need, but because everything's all generated dynamically, there was all these missing characters and things that wouldn't work, or random slashes that would appear based on different kind of inputs from different APIs. Or one thing would work. So as an example, there's like the banner that's empty. Say it would apply the font fine if it wasn't being applied to a texture, but when it was being applied to a texture, Unity couldn't handle it again. So there's a lot of challenges like that where there are ways around it. There's a lot of manual stuff now that I have to do, where I just check what the fonts, what the elements in the content are. So you can check, does this text have Cyrillic in it, or does this text have, say, a Japanese character in it? And then I can do those checks and change the game object dynamically to use a different font. So I try to do that a little bit more manually rather than just going off entire fallback fonts from Unity now. But if anybody ever has challenges with that, let me know. I've spent way too much time looking at international text and fixing these things. There's a lot more still for me to do. I'm still increasing the variety of items and interactions. I've only just opened up to like a proper beta release now to get more beta testers, and that's been working out okay. And I really want to improve visuals, because right now it's very basic, and there's a lot more that I can do with Unity these days. So I wanted to make it look a lot better. Then I'm going to speed through some App Store gotchas, because I know we're getting close to running out of time, and I want to make sure you all have a chance to ask questions if you have any questions. App Store stuff. The most important one that I would share with you all, because it's a little bit more recent, and you may not know that it's an issue. I didn't know until I almost accidentally revealed my address to the world, is Google Play at the moment. They are somewhat forcing people now, if you're an organization account, so if, as an example, you're making a startup right now and your startup doesn't have an office and you've got your home address as your office, which I did at the time, then Google aren't going to ask whether it's okay to share your address. They just do the moment that you kind of put an app up. So be really careful with that and try and avoid giving Google your organization address if you can, if it's your house. The way that I worked around it, which is not an official way to do it, is I've now got a virtual office space where I'm allowed to use their address for my business. And I've got that registered instead. That can work, but Google don't always support that. So some virtual addresses aren't great. Some of them are like shared across many, many people, where you'll have an address. Like if anybody's seen, there's services called like Reship and stuff like that, where you can give them a virtual address and they'll send stuff from all around the world to that address first and then forward it to you. But when they've got really complicated addresses where you're like one box of many, Google probably won't accept that. It sort of needs to be an actual office address that is a physical address that you could go visit, is what it seems like Google wants. But you can try it, see whether you get approved. I've now got a virtual address, which I'm allowed to use. That's a physical place, and it's not my house, so nobody will be coming to visit me. If you have an individual account, so if you're not making an organization, if you're not trying to do a startup with a separate name, if it's just going to be your name, your Google account as a developer, it won't show your actual physical address unless you try to monetize your app. But most of the time, people are going to want to monetize their app eventually. The more your app grows, the more you're going to want to monetize it. You don't want to then get stuck realizing, oh crap, it's going to share my address if I monetize my app. So keep that in mind, because it is actually a problem that Google don't seem to want to fix. I've asked them and they said no. So that they don't care. The other thing that I would really, really recommend, this is something that I learned the hard way. I initially started with my alpha release. I put up a form where I said, hey, if you want to test GeoGlitched, here's a form, fill in the form, and I will send you access. And you can set up internal testing groups within App Store for iOS. You can set up internal testing groups, put in all the emails that you want, and those people will get access to your app. And that's helpful. But the moment you want to expand beyond that, if you want to just be able to say, hey, here is my app, the better way forward is public links. So you can have what's called an external testing link, where you can generate a public link for your app that you can then share just to specific people. I've put it into a QR code, and then at events, specific times where I know the people are going to be interested in testing the app, I can give them a QR code. I could share this theoretically on social media. I haven't, but you could, and then have a way where a lot of people could try your app without it needing to be officially out on the App Store yet. And that's probably where I would say, if you're going to build an AR app and you're going to test it with this public link first before you release it fully as an app. So that way you get people who are really keen to try it. You can also then see how they're going with it, see whether they're getting crashes, stuff like that. That is a QR code that I made for my app. I'll show it at the end as well if anybody wants to try out GeoGlitched later on. But we can also show you the link later as well. But that is a way where it looks more professional to have a QR code. Thanks to COVID, everybody knows how to scan QR codes now. And it also means that you've got a lot more control over it. If you eventually want to pull that version of the app, if you don't want people to try it anymore, you can take it away from App Center. From the App Store, you can say that version is no longer available and people won't be able to open it anymore. So much more useful than having a giant list of emails. The other thing to keep in mind, which can come up, especially if, say, you start building something with a developer account and you want to move to an organization, if, say, you grow, you've got more people, you've made a whole kind of game studio, your bundle ID has to start with the one that you initially made. So as an example with GeoGlitched, we changed our name. We weren't the Reality Crafters before. We had a different name. We were MPAR before when we first released GeoGlitched. And when I moved across, so when we wanted to change that to be the Reality Crafters in our bundle ID within the Apple App Store, we lost all of our existing distribution list. So we didn't get to keep any of the testers. We literally had to take the app down and then re-upload it again from scratch to have that name different. So even though it can seem inconsequential at the time when you're first making your app and you're putting it up on the App Store, this bundle ID that you choose is important, and they won't let you change it afterwards. So if it's an initial test and you don't think you're going to go too far with it, don't worry too much. But if it's like you think you're going to build into a full app and you're going to want it to be there for years to come, try and think carefully about that bundle ID. And then finally, why you should enter hackathons and competitions. This is going to be a fast one, but basically, I've seen a lot of benefit by being a leadership leader at the moment and seeing people entering competitions and getting involved. But I think that a lot of people don't realize that it's an option at the moment, which is why I wanted to sneakily let you all know to try and get in on these sorts of things while you can, especially while you're a student. It's a really good opportunity. But you get support from hackathon mentors and staff. So as an example, you literally were able to book in one-on-one time with people at Niantic to help you with your app in this challenge. So free, that's stuff that is invaluable to just kind of get in touch with these people, and they can help you later on down the line. They also have ideation sessions sometimes in hackathons and these competitions, so you can get together, chat with people, come up with ideas. They can give guidance on how to come up with ideas. If you're one of those people who you really want to make an app, but you don't know what you want to make, you don't know what the option is, you don't even know how to come up with the idea yet, you just want to make something, these sessions can be really helpful. They help you come up with ideas, work out what's feasible, challenge your thoughts, that sort of thing. You can also find a team. So, excuse me, the hackathons, especially for Lightship, often have accompanying Discord channels where people will go off and try and find other people. So one person will say looking for a UI designer, programmers, things like that. And then you can put together a team, meet new people. At the moment, you've got the benefit of being where you are. You've got fellow students around who you could kind of team up with. But say you finish now and you want to find a 3D modeler, or you want to find somebody who's going to be really good at the 2D menus and stuff that you want to add to your app, things like that. Within a hackathon and competitions like this, there's the option to get more people and meet new people, get them into your team without it being too big of an issue. Like once the competition's done, you didn't enjoy working with them, that's okay. Things move on, competition's done, you're not stuck with them forever. And feedback is also very useful. So you can get feedback sessions, especially I've seen it a lot with Lightship's competitions, where you can have one-on-one consultations with people at Niantic who will give you feedback on your app of what you've started to build, what they think is good and bad. This stuff is very, very useful, especially when you're getting feedback from people who work at the places. So if you get feedback from Niantic themselves, you're getting feedback from people that have the background knowledge who can help you with the knowledge of AR, what's worked in the past for Niantic. They can give you these things. Similar to with me telling you this stuff right now, is getting all the advice ahead of time so that you don't kind of stumble into the same issues. Niantic can tell you, hey, don't do this. It's not the right way to do it. We've tried this sort of idea before. People can't work it out. Do it this way. The one that worked for me is it's good to have a deadline. That one was very, very useful when it came to GeoGlitched because it made me have to finish it by a certain time. Even if it's not complete, have a version that is done, ready to show people by a certain time that you can't control. You can't change the deadline. Competition's deadline is their deadline. Also, prizes are actually pretty substantial for these. So as an example, this was a competition that was earlier this year, not one that I've joined, but it was a web AR one that was with Eighth Wall, which is also with Niantic, so that's the web AR side of things. They were encouraging people to make stuff with Eighth Wall. If you won, you got $3,000. You were spotlighted on their blog, you had a meeting with Niantic staff, and you were featured on the Eighth Wall homepage. But if you didn't win, say you got one of the prize categories, they had 4 different categories, then you got $500 if you won in those categories. Say you didn't win those, but you were still a good app, there's another 4 people who also got honorable mention prizes of $250. So there's the chance of you getting stuff is quite high. Sometimes the amount of people entering these could just be, say, 20, 30 people. So the chance of you being one of the people who gets a category of some variety is higher than you think sometimes. And you don't know how many people are going to enter. Sometimes lots of people enter, but then sometimes it'll maybe only be 10 people enter. You don't know. So you should just give it a go because you could end up being one of the people that gets a prize. And it's pretty good when that stuff happens because hey, money's good and prices are good. Sometimes you get swag and stuff as well. You get Niantic stuff, or if you join competitions for other companies that aren't Niantic, you get Niantic stuff. So it can be pretty cool. With that, that's all my ramblings that I've got. Does anybody have questions? And I can go a little bit over if needed. But otherwise, you can also ask me questions later if you want to message me, email me, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, anybody got questions?
Yeah, we got our first question from Brad here.
Hello, I'm Brad.
Hey, Brad.
So in terms of, so with GeoGlitched, when did you, like, what was the key thing that made you decide, okay, I'm going to take this from being an alpha build to beta, and what will be like the goals that you have to reach before you can go from beta to being a full game, like, effectively?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think for me, initially making it an alpha was even just for my own kind of interest. I wanted to see people use my app, to be honest, to start with. So even with that competition that I entered where I won, we didn't even have to release the app or even have it as an alpha or anything. We just had to kind of provide them the code. So it didn't even have to be technically ready in a state where people could go out and play it, though it was when I did enter it. They were able to play it. But from that point, getting it from alpha, where it was just me wanting people to try it, it was actually very cool. Like I had somebody send me a video of them trying the app to give me feedback, and that was just cool in itself. Just seeing other people using your app for an alpha. The alpha side is also very what's the word? It's non-committal in a way. Like you can make an alpha. If it's not great, if people hate it, it's not the end of the world. Nobody else sees it. It's just around the people that kind of got to try it out initially. So it was mainly just a really good way of getting other people to try it on other devices, see their reaction. Now that it's at the beta stage, I sort of chose the beta stage basically around how stable I felt the app was, and whether I would be comfortable with potentially lots of people trying it through that QR code. So the beta stage is when I was ready to say I went to Sid AR and put it up on the screens of Sid AR for people to try, where there would be a lot more people potentially to try it. There'd be up to 50 or 60 people at that event who could give it a go, who I may not necessarily know who they are. So I wouldn't be able to directly get in touch with them, not necessarily to know how they're going with it. So it's basically when I was comfortable with that level of people trying the app, where I wouldn't need to feel like I have to handhold them or anything like that. That's sort of when I went to the beta stage. When it gets released is I'm hoping very soon because I would like the app to just be out there now. I'm sort of over it just being in kind of private places. So for me, it's just getting it to the point where I'm very certain that I'm not going to get random unexpected charges on my credit card from database usage and things like that, and chat GPT and stuff like that. So getting it to a point where it's stable. The biggest thing was performance as well. So the app was somewhat laggy at times on Android phones. And so I didn't want to release it as a full version of the app yet until I'd got that more smooth, because you also sort of only get one chance when people want to try your app. If they try it and it's laggy, they're just going to assume it's always laggy, even if you fix the bugs later on. So I kind of want it to be at least performant enough on enough devices as well. So that's sort of the levels that it goes through. I've seen a lot of people in the Lightship community and elsewhere as well, where I think people prefer at the moment for it to be a private beta when it's AR, at least because it's still so new and not everybody quite understands how to use it. So it's a lot easier to kind of ease people into it a little bit as a beta. Whereas if you just release it on the App Store and people don't understand, you could get a lot of people who just try it, who don't work it out, who then give you negative reviews, and then you can't get rid of those negative reviews. So you kind of want to make sure it's at a point where it's all good. Onboarding is also an issue. So you want to make sure that once you've tried it on a bunch of people, that you improve the onboarding process. So when people first open the game, how do you teach them what to do? And you want to get to the point where you haven't had to guide them yourself before you want to put it on an app store as well. Because when it goes in the app store, you can't guide anybody. They're really going to be reliant on what your app tells you to do. And in that case, that's the other danger, is if you make an amazing game, but people can't work out how to use it, they're going to think it's broken. They're going to complain. You get the most random reviews that show that people didn't fully understand what you're on about. But if you do it well, then you get the good reviews, and life is slightly smoother sailing. Hopefully that answers the question. Go.
What is your workflow generally like when doing project management for hack sprints, stuff like that?
It can always change. At the moment, I try and go with sprints. In general, in my life, in every kind of role that I've had, I try and do weekly sprints where I sort of try and set goals for myself that make sense, that are doable within a week. Um, I try and avoid it being too long of a sprint. So, like, I've seen people who would do, say, fortnightly sprints or monthly sprints, and give themselves sort of wider goals. But for me, that doesn't work just because I find that if your goal is too broad, then it's easy for it to fall off the track. Where it's kind of, if you're trying to do too much within a month, you don't really track how you're going. Then if you were off track after a month, it takes a month then to get back on track. Whereas if it's weekly sprints, you can just generally have, say, even if you're just working with you and say one other person, or even just yourself, having a weekly check-in to be like, okay, did I get to where I thought I would get to? Means you've got a lot less leeway, sorry, a lot more leeway when it comes to correcting things than longer sprints. So I try and do that. Um, in terms of like the workflows, I generally, you can do whatever makes sense for you. I tend to start by I'll go out and I'll sketch ideas first. So I'll sketch out sort of wireframes for a new concept, or I'll write out thoughts on what I think a new feature should be or what I'm going to be doing. Come up with those ideas first, and then I generally make just a giant backlog list of just many, many tasks, all the different things that I think could be good for the app. Then I'll try and prioritize them based on I guess, the the benefits of them, like which one's going to be the most consequential for the app. So performance stuff tends to go up the top. Um, Niceties, where it's kind of like I've got some features where it's I would really like to have this in the game, but it's going to take time for me to do. Things like that sun simulation, where one day I might put it back in, but it's not highest priority. I try and record everything in a backlog. So I use Notion at the moment for my like personal sprints and for reality crafter sprints. And so I can just have a giant list of tasks in Notion where within each task, I can put in all the information that I have. Like I could put in pictures of my sketches and my screenshots and things like that of what I'm thinking. Have it all self-contained so that then when it comes to starting a sprint, I can just drag that task into that week's sprint and know what I've got to do, and kind of work from there. The other thing I would probably recommend as well is don't be too broad with your tasks, which you've likely been taught by this point, but make sure that every task that you have in your sprint has a proper end goal. So it needs to be something that you can say, when is this task actually finished? Because if you do something really vague, like say if I just had one task for sun simulation, then it can go on forever. Say that sun simulation takes you 2 months to get working right, then you haven't really tracked your 2 months. You've sort of been vaguely trying to do this for 2 months. So I'd always break it up into sort of smaller chunks of like kind of get the sun to appear with semantic segmentation first. Something that could be done within a week. And know that when that task is done is when that is working in the app, and then kind of keep building upon it. And that way things will go a lot smoother. You'll track your progress a lot better, and you'll sort of know where you're at a bit easier. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Any other questions from students? Okay, I got one final question for you, Pat.
Ask away.
So typically AR development can be something that is daunting for people. It's hard to test sometimes. Some of the concepts can be really difficult to pick up, and it's a very new technology, right? I'm sure you as a technologist have, faced daunting tasks before, times where you're trying to test things, but it's not exactly working out, and you just kind of feel overwhelmed. I'm curious if you can relate a little bit about a time maybe that you felt blocked with AR development, and any tips you have on staying motivated when working with, the bleeding edge of technology and working with stuff that is new and may not necessarily be, an easy XYZ, do this, do that, and you'll have the greatest results. Sometimes there's experimentation. So I'd love to hear what your perspective with dealing with that uncertainty and sometimes strife is, and if you have any practices to share.
Yeah, sure. There's been plenty of that. So even before AR stuff, excuse me, I've been doing a lot of just emerging tech stuff. So before all that, I've been doing stuff with VR, with like Internet of Things, like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and Bluetooth beacons and all sorts of random stuff. So I've done a lot of sort of working on stuff that's not fully ready yet, where it's sort of like it's early development. There's not a lot of documentation. There's not a lot of help a lot of the time for these things. So I think I've just gotten used to it in a way, knowing that there's not always all the answers for a problem. When it comes to AR in particular, it's I think always important to go into it with a flexible mindset as well. So as the best example I can think of is, say, the Camden Gems app that I was showing you guys. That one was a lot more complicated than we thought it was going to be when we first came up with the idea. We'd never used VPS before in our lives. It was only relatively new. I think Niantic had only released it, say, a few weeks beforehand. So we'd never kind of actually used the technology before to know whatever its limitations, what's going to work, what's not going to work. So when we first came into it, we planned out this game. We said, okay, we want the game to work where you go to locations in Camden and events will happen. And we'd gone through and found specific places in Camden that we thought were going to be great. That there was a sundial that was on the top of a mountainish area in a park, very pretty place, and we're like, this is going to be a great spot for it. Planned out a whole lot of stuff around this sundial, filmed stuff to show, hey, because we wanted to also submit a video for this, for the competition, and then trying to get, say, the sundial to work. Impossible. It wouldn't work. The issue was entirely separate from just AR in general. It was just the internet connection wasn't great. When you got to that sundial, that one location had poor internet, and VPS really required internet at that time to kind of establish where you were in the world, and to be able to kind of work out the scans and kind of that sort of thing. So we spent a whole lot of time, say, with several of those locations where we thought it was going to be fine. It wasn't, and we were on a deadline where literally it was going to be due soon, and things weren't working. So the main approach that we took was just try and keep things to the bare minimum. Like, you're the only person who knows what your app is supposed to be when you were first initially aspiring towards it. And when things don't work, pare it down a little bit, take a step back, and then find the other solutions. So we were able to kind of go, okay, sundial doesn't work. A lot of locations aren't working. What's something that's really simple that can work? And so we just find things like, say, the Camden pools. That sign just seemed to work for whatever reason. So we just tried stuff, just throw things at the wall, go to different places, try things, see what happens, see what works. And when it came to getting blocked with AR stuff in general, a lot of the time it's stuff where you can change your idea a little bit initially, especially if you're on a time crunch. If your idea is, say, for us with one of our things was trying to change the weather with semantic segmentation. We really wanted it to be kind of like entirely changing the weather. We wanted it to look like an entirely different weather system, depending on how the game was going. And it got to the point where it just wasn't quite there yet. So we had to then just find ways of using the limitations. So even though, as an example, sometimes the semantic segmentation would look really pixelated between, say, where the sky is and where the trees are and things like that. So what you could do, as an example, is try and build that into your game. Make it a feature that your design for the game is more pixelated. Have sort of special effects that look more pixelated, so it sort of hides it a little bit. Try and think through those things instead of trying to work out how can I fix semantic segmentation, because we can't. That's out of our control. That's from Niantic. How can you work with it instead? And if you get to the point where you've got an idea, you try to build it, it's just not working. Also, first point of call is ask people. Don't be afraid to kind of jump onto Discord or onto, Slack or message forums and stuff for Unity and ask people, because a lot of the time it'll be a lot faster if you just ask somebody and chances are they've experienced it before. I've had issues where I've had, say, black screen issues and things like that with using Unity and different AR frameworks, where I would just ask people and somebody else has already had that issue, known how to solve it, and will kind of just be able to give you the answer. So also not sit on things for too long. The moment you hit a problem, you're not expected to always know the answers. Just kind of ask around, ask, right now you've got, say, tutors and stuff who can help you around while you're studying. But outside of that, you can always ask people in Discords and communities. The more people you get to know around the place, the more people can direct you to the right place as well. So you have now virtually met me. And so if you get stuck with something, you can message me and just be like, hey, Pat, I don't know what's going on here. This isn't working. Do you know why this would be? I might not have any idea, but then I might be able to be like, actually, I know somebody who does. Or I can kind of pass you on to like the right place to get help. So also don't try and do everything yourself, because especially in emerging technology, that's impossible. You're never going to fix everything unless you're like a master genius coder that could have coded it all themselves from scratch. And we don't have time for that. So ask, get help as much as you can.
Great advice. Why don't we have you plug up your stuff? Give us any final anecdotes you want to leave us with, and then we'll clap you out.
Sure. Cool. Well, I'm not going to plug too much. You can all find me. I'll let Zach share my contact details as well if you want. Oh no, where'd my presentation go? That's a shame. Let's see if it'll let me share it one more time.
Yeah, I'll
I was
drop
gonna share that QR
your
code.
contacts in our Slack. Encourage everyone to go follow your stuff.
Yeah, feel free. You can get in touch with me on social medias. I'm relatively easy to find if you search for my name in various places. You can try out GeoGlitched if you'd like, but you also don't have to. That wasn't the point of my presentation. I want to give you guys help and kind of advice on this sort of thing, but mainly don't hesitate to reach out. Even if it's something as simple as you need somebody to test your app, you can always send me builds to just be like, hey, Pat, I just need somebody who understands AR to try this out and tell me whether it's any good or what I should fix or change. So feel free, get in touch with me in whichever way you prefer. And I'm always happy to help out. And yeah, otherwise, it was lovely virtually meeting you all. And I hope one day to actually be able to travel there in person and be able to kind of see your town, because it's a pretty cool town and I'm jealous.
Well, thank you, Pat. We'll hope to see you sometime soon. We'll see if we can make it happen. Everyone, please give Pat a big round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.